What's going on, friends and family? Thank you guys so much for tuning into Every Day is a Saturday with your host, me, myself, and I, Bryan Roof. Hey guys, we are on to episode 3. And you know what? Let me tell you guys something. A year ago when I started this podcasting, I had no clue where I was going to go with it. Had no clue what I was going to do with it. Didn't even know if I was going to like it, to be quite honest with you. But once I got into it, I have really taken a liking to it, and hence that's why we're here and having a season 2. But I got to thank each and every one of you guys, especially, and you guys are the ones that make this all worth it. You know, seeing that people are actually watching it, seeing that people are actually, caring about the episodes, and there's people actually responding. I get messages all the time as well. And I thank you guys so much. I can't thank you guys enough. And you guys completely motivate me to keep this going. All right. So with that all being said, thank you once again. And we're going to get on with episode 3. So episode 2 was about Randy Kraft. So if you guys hadn't had a chance to go back and check that out, go ahead and go check that one out. That guy was quite the crazy individual. But our next one here is probably... He's a sicko himself, but probably one of the biggest, most notorious serial killers in America. This dude killed a lot of females, and he kind of was just an average Joe looking kind of guy. Guy right here. So we're going to talk about Gary Ridgway, and he is definitely an interesting guy, and we're going to kind of go through his life and kind of see what kind of, made him tick and want to do the nasty, heinous crimes that he had committed, because that's, like I said, whenever I start doing these kind of things, it really brings me to what leads someone up to doing something like this. And, and what kind of, how were they raised? What type of things did they go through their life? These people in particular that I happen to be talking about were all in the military. So was it something in the military? Did they didn't get enough help afterwards or even during? We got to go through the case. And it's also, it's kind of different when you start actually doing investigative work versus kind of like watching it, like watching an autobiography about someone, because not all the time are you going to get a lot of the details. Sometimes when you're watching some of these shows and stuff, they get, an hour segment or something like that. So you only get little bits and pieces. And there's a lot of information kind of missed. So doing the investigative work with all these, it's quite interesting, I must say. So let's go ahead and talk about Gary Ridgway. Gary Ridgway was born February 18th, 1949. He is an American serial killer known as the Green River Killer. He was initially convicted of 48 separate murders committed between the early 1980s and late 1990s. As part of his plea bargain, another conviction was added, bringing the total number of convictions to 49, making him the second most prolific serial killer in the United States history, according to confirmed murders. All right, so the guy is quite the crazy individual. He's actually the second prolific serial killer in America. Nothing to be proud of, absolutely. These guys are crazy, and it's crazy. What's crazier to me is how many victims there are and how long they were able to get away with these type of things, and I think with the way that we have technology and everything today, it's a lot harder, especially with, cameras everywhere. Back in these days, there was no cameras, there wasn't a lot of technology, but now everybody's basically carrying a camera and things of that nature. So maybe that's why we don't see, these types of cases and them to go on as long as they do. So let's go ahead and learn a little bit more about Ridgway's. So we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about his early life. Ridgway was born on February 18th, 1949. Like I said, he was born in Salt Lake City, Utah, the second of Mary and Thomas Ridgway's three sons. His home life was somewhat troubled. Relatives have described his mother as domineering and have said that while young, he witnessed more than one violent argument between his parents. His father was a bus driver who would often complain about presence of sex workers. Ridgway had a bedwetting problem until he was 13, and his mother would wash his genitals after every episode. He would later tell defense psychologists that as an adolescent, he had conflicting feelings of anger and sexual attraction toward his mother and fantasized about killing her. Ridgway is a dyslexic and was held back a year after high school. When he was 16, he stabbed a 6-year-old boy who survived the attack. Ridgway had led the boy into the woods and then stabbed him through the ribs and to his liver. Wow. Ridgway IQ was recorded as being into the low 80s. So, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what we just heard. And I mean, it sounds like he kind of started off with a lot of issues to begin with, to the fact that he seemed to have a little bit of a fixation about sex and things of that nature, and to the degree that he was thinking about his own mother, which, wow. I mean, he is, like I said, he's a sick son of a gun. He had bedwetting problems. So he stabbed a little boy. And I don't even know, it doesn't really describe or talk about if he gotten, any kind of jail time or anything of that such. It's kind of crazy to me that he was still able to join, the Navy. But that's probably because it was around Vietnam time frame. So let's go ahead and get a little bit more into his adult life, and we'll kind of start talking about him as an adult and what he ended up doing inside the Navy. So Ridgway graduated from Tai High School in 1969 and married his 19-year-old high school girlfriend, Claudia Craig. He joined the United States Navy and was sent to Vietnam, where he served on board a supply ship and saw combat. During his time in the military, Ridgway had frequent sexual intercourse with sex workers, also known as hookers or prostitutes, and contracted gonorrhea. Although angered by this, he continued this activity without protection. The marriage ended within a year. When questioned about Ridgway after his arrest, friends and family described him as a friendly but strange. His first two marriages resulted in divorce because of infidelities by both partners. His second wife, Marcia Winslow, which I imagine some of these right here, I'm not quite sure who's who. It looks like he's married more than once, which is kind of crazy to me. But they both obviously ended in divorce. His second wife, Marcia Winslow, claimed that he had placed her in a chokehold. He became religious during his second marriage and started going door to door, reading the Bible aloud at work and at home, and insisting that his wife follow the strict teachings of their pastor. Ridgway would also frequently cry after sermons of reading the Bible. Despite his beliefs, Ridgway continued to solicit the service of sex workers and wanted his wife to participate in sex in public and inappropriate places sometimes. So sorry about that. In inappropriate places, sometimes even in areas where his victims' bodies were later discovered. According to women in his life, Ridgway had an insatiable sexual appetite. His 3 ex-wives and several ex-girlfriends reported that he demanded sex from them several times a day. Often, he would want to have sex in a public area or in woods. Ridgway himself admitted to having fixation with sex workers, with whom he had a love-hate relationship. He frequently complained about their presence in his neighborhood, but he also took advantage of their service regularly. In a statement read at his plea hearing, Gary Ridgway said he hated prostitutes and didn't want to pay for sex. Some have speculated that Ridgway was torn between his lust and his staunch religious beliefs. Wow. So, yeah, let me take a little quick water break here. All right, we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about everything we just heard about him right now. And, he is definitely one of those guys who was conflicted between his normal life and also, with his religion. And he had he had a little bit of a fixation and possibly he was addicted, obviously, to sex. And he had this weird thing about sex workers. But I think that where you can see that he started getting really upset and frustrated about the situation is he started contracting diseases. And, obviously that led to him getting caught up with his wife. And obviously that probably got him more mad and frustrated. So he just had a thing with, sex right off rip. He couldn't, sustain himself. It was just a major addiction, just like, everybody has certain addictions. His was having sex. And then obviously he got to the level where he couldn't take it anymore. So we're going to kind of start talking more about some of his murders and what he did to land himself in jail. Throughout the 1980s and the 1990s, Ridgway is believed to have murdered at least 71 teenage girls and women near Seattle and Tacoma, Washington. In court statements, Ridgway later reported that he had killed so many that he lost count. A majority of his murders occurred between 1982 and 1984. The victims were believed to be either sex workers or runaways whom he picked up along Pacific Highway South. Ridgway sometimes showed the women a picture of his son to trick them into trusting him. They would engage in sexual activity, and after minutes of intercourse from behind, Ridgway would wrap his forearm around the front of their necks and use the other arm to pull back as tightly as he could, strangling them. He killed most of his victims in his home, his truck, or secluded areas. Most of their bodies were dumped in wooded areas around the Green River, Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, and other dump sites within South King County. There were also 2 confirmed and another 2 suspected victims found in Portland, Oregon area. The bodies were often left in clusters, sometimes posed, usually nude. He would sometimes return to the victims' bodies and have sexual intercourse with them. Ridgway later explained that he did not find necrophilia more sexually satisfying, but having sex with the deceased reduced his need to obtain a living victim and thus limited his exposure to being caught. Because most of the bodies were not discovered until only the skeletons remained, 2 victims are still unidentified. Ridgway occasionally contaminated the dump sites with gum, cigarettes, and written materials belonging to others. And he even transported a few victims' remains across state lines into Oregon to confuse the police. In the early 1980s, the King County Sheriff Office formed the Green River Task Force to investigate the murders. The task force members included Robert Keppel and Dave Reichert, who periodically interviewed incarcerated serial killer Ted Bundy in 1984. Bundy offered his opinions on the psychology, motivations, and behavior of the killer. He suggested that the killer was revisiting the dump sites to have sex with his victims, which turned out to be true. And if police found a fresh grave, they should stake it out and wait for him to come back. Also contributing to the investigation was FBI Special Agent John E. Douglas, who developed a profile of the suspect. Ridgway was arrested in 1982 and 2001 on charges related to prostitution. He became a suspect in the Green River killings in 1983. In 1984, Ridgway passed a polygraph test. Sorry about that. On April 7th, 1987, police took hair and saliva samples from Ridgway. Around 1985, Ridgway began dating Judith Mawson, who became his third wife in 1988. Mawson claimed in 2010 television interview that when she moved into his house while they were dating, there was no carpet. Detectives later told her he had probably wrapped a body in the carpet. In the same interview, she described how he would leave for work early in the morning some days, astonishingly, for the overtime pay. Mawson speculated that he must have committed some of the murders while supposedly working these early morning shifts. She claimed that she had not suspected Ridgway crimes before she was contacted by authorities in 1987 and had not even heard of Green River Killer before that time because she did not watch the news. Author Penny Moorhead interviewed Ridgway in prison, and he said while he was in the relationship with Mawson, his kill rate went down and he truly loved her. Of his 49 victims, only 3 were killed after he married Mawson. Mawson told a local television reporter, "I feel I have saved lives by being his wife and making him happy." The samples collected in 1987 were later subjected to DNA profiling, providing the evidence for his arrest warrant. On November 30th, 2001, Ridgway was at the Kenworth truck factory where he worked as a spray painter. When police arrived to arrest him, Ridgway was arrested on suspicion of murdering 4 women nearly 20 years earlier after being identified as a potential suspect. When DNA evidence conclusively linked semen left in the victims to the saliva swab taken by the police, the 4 victims named in the original indictment were Marcia Chapman, Opal Mills, Cynthia Hines, and Carol Ann Christensen. 3 more victims, Wendy Cofield, Deborah Bonner, and Deborah Estes, were added to the indictment after a forensic scientist identified microscopic spray paint spheres as specific brand and composition of paint used at the Kenworth factory during the specific time frame when these victims were killed. All right, so we're going to kind of hear more about his plea bargain and how he confessed and the sentencings. Early in August 2003, Seattle Television News reported that Ridgway had been moved from a maximum security cell at King County Jail to an Airway Heights minimum medium security level tank. Other news reported that his lawyers, led by Anthony Savage, were closing on a plea deal bargain that would spare him the death penalty in return for his confessions to a number of Green River murders. On November 5th, 2003, Ridgway entered a guilty plea to 48 charges of aggravated first-degree murder as part of a plea bargain agreed to in June. That would spare him execution in exchange for his cooperation in locating the remains of his victims and providing other details. In his statement accompanying his guilty plea, Ridgway explained that he had killed all of his victims inside King County, Washington, and that he had transported the remains of the 2 women near Portland to confuse the police. Deputy Prosecutor Jeffrey Baird noted in court that deal contained the names of 41 victims who not be subject of State versus Ridgway. If it were not for the plea agreement, King County prosecution attorney Maylong explained his decision to make the deal. "We could have gone forward with 7 counts, but this is all we could have ever hoped to solve. At the end of the trial, whatever the outcome, there would have been lingering doubts about the rest of these crimes. This agreement was the avenue to the truth. And in the end, the search for the truth is still why we have a criminal justice system. Gary Ridgway does not deserve our mercy. He does not deserve to live. The mercy provided by today's resolution is directed not at Ridgway, but toward the families who have suffered so much. On December 18th, 2003, King County Superior Court Judge Richard Jones sentenced Ridgway to 48 life sentences without the possibility of parole to be served consecutively. He also sentenced to an additional 10 years for tampering with evidence for each of the 48 victims, adding 480 years to his 48 life sentences. Later, he was given another life sentence after the remains of his 49th victim was found. Ridgway led prosecutors to 3 bodies in 2003. On August 16th of that year, the remains of a 16-year-old girl found near Washington, 40 feet from State Route 410, were pronounced as belonging to Pammy Annette Event, who had been believed to be a victim of the Green River Killer. The remains of Marie Malver and April Buttram were found in September of 2003. On November 23, 2005, the Associated Press reported that a weekend hiker found the skull of the 48 women Ridgway admitted murdering in his 2003 plea bargain with King County prosecutors. The skull of another victim, Tracy Winston, who was 19 when she disappeared from Northgate Mall on September 12, 1983, was found on November 20th, 2005 by a man hiking in a wooded area near Highway 18 near Issaquah, southeast of Seattle. This was the find which led to Ridgway's 49th life sentence. Ridgway confessed to more confirmed murders than any other American serial killer. Over a period of 5 months of police and prosecutor interviews, he confessed to 48 murders, 42 of which were on the police's list of probable Green River Killer victims. On February 9th, 2004, county prosecutors began to release videotape records of Ridgway's confessions in one taped interview. He initially told investigators that he was responsible for the death of 65 women. In another taped interview, which recorded on December 31st, 2003, Ridgway claimed to have murdered 71 victims and confessed to having had sex with them before killing them, a detail which he did not reveal until after his sentencing. In his confession, he acknowledged that he targeted prostitutes because they were easy to pick up and that he hated most of them. He confessed that he had sex with his victims' bodies after he murdered them, but claimed began burying the later victims so that he could resist the urge to commit necrophilia. Ridgway later said that murdering young women was his career. Man, what a sick dude. So we're going to talk just a little bit about, his life incarceration, and then we'll kind of conclude from there. But Ridgway was placed in solitary confinement at Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla in January of 2004. On May 14th, 2015, he was transferred to the USP Florence High, a high-security federal prison east of Kansas City, Colorado. In September 2015, after a public outcry and discussion, and Governor Jay Inslee, Corrections Secretary Bernie Warner announced that Ridgway would be transferred back to Washington to be easily accessible for open murder investigations. Ridgway was returned by chartered plane to Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla from USP Florence High on October 24th, 2015. All right, guys. Well, we're going to go ahead and kind of conclude this and talk a little bit more about, what kind of led him to get himself caught up and get himself in trouble. It just sounds like he got himself to the level of he couldn't contain himself. He couldn't stop. The one time he was kind of able to stop was when he found his one wife that he was really in love with. He said he only killed 3 women at that time. It's really sad to me that this guy took so many young women's life. I think a lot of his victims Out of his 49, there's 16, 17-year-old, 23, 31, 17, 16, 16, 18, 15, 16, 23, 16, 18, 20, 15, 20, 14, 18, 17, 23, 19, 17, 16, 18, 21, 18, 18, 19, 15, 19, 22, 21, 16, 26, 19, 19, 25, 15, 22, 21, 19, 16, 17, 19, 21, 36, 38. There was a Jane Doe that was anywhere from 14 to 18, another Jane Doe anywhere from 13 to 24. So that was just 49 of his victims. There's a lot more, but those were what he had the plea bargain with to save his life, because otherwise he'd be executed, and I honestly think he should have get the execution. I guess I understand, from the aspect that the victims' families want to know, was it him, and to kind of put them at ease, I guess, that someone's not out there still doing these heinous crimes. So it is, I guess, great for the families, but in some senses, I think a coward like this, he deserves the absolute death penalty. He deserves to die. Here now, taxpayers and all that's got to keep him alive. He stays alive. He's no doubt in maximum security. There's no way that they're putting him with general population ever. So he's obviously got to kind of, he's still alive. He's able to eat. He's able to breathe. All because he made a plea. And it's just crazy, like I said, how long these guys were able to get along with, get away with these crazy crimes. And more or less, it's so sad when I read these lists, how young these women were, how much more life they had. Obviously, at that time when he decided to take their lives, a lot of them were prostituting and stuff like that. Doesn't mean that they weren't going to change their lives. Didn't mean that they weren't young enough to have made a difference, or change that. That's the sad part, is that he took a lot of these young women's life before they even had a chance to become adults, before they even had a chance to make a life for themselves. So that's a very selfish act. A lot of the pictures that I had seen with him, he just looks kind of like your average Joe guy. Carried jobs, did his hair clean cut, didn't look like he was like homeless or anything like that. Nothing that would, I guess, spark anybody's interest to think, oh, wow, this dude's a serial killer. But we're going to go ahead and wrap this up, folks. I hope you guys are enjoying the show. If you guys can please just continue to share it out with everybody. If you guys would like to, get in contact with me, please email me. Every day is a Saturday, 365 at yahoo.com. Once again, that's every day is a Saturday, 365 yahoo.com. And just email me anything you want. You can say hello. Hey, Bryan, your show sucks. Yeah. Or, hey, bro, I'm loving it. I would love to see you cover this. And, I would like to start kind of taking some polls on what people would like to see for season 3 even, because we're going to start thinking about what we're going to do for season 3. Do we keep going with these these true crime type things? It's kind of fun, but there isn't, there is a long list of them, but not long enough list to keep on going for a long time. So anyways, also, if you guys are struggling, need any help, there's a crisis lifeline, dial 988, press 1, or you can, like I said, you can reach out to me, email me, message me. But if you want to talk to someone discreetly and you don't want to share it with your friends, your family, reach out to the crisis lifeline. All you got to do is dial 988 and press 1, and it is, to my knowledge, anonymous unless you would like to give them up your information. Also, I can't forget about the Gunroom Radio. Please go check out Gunroom Radio, where the musicians are either veterans or family members of veterans who served. It is a great station. Go check them out, www.gunroomradio.com. I hope you guys are having an amazing January so far, and don't let the day kick your butt. Make sure you're out there kicking it. Until next time, we'll see y'all.